Our Terran protagonist, Innovation, is on the ropes here in the GSL. He lost his opening match to Rain. It was an incredibly close series. It went 2-1, and you need to check out those games if you haven't, because this is one of those chronological series where I'm doing Innovation's entire GSL run. This is the first GSL of Heart of the Swarm, and between the matches that we saw and the matches that we're seeing now, Hyun played Gumiho, and Gumiho smashed Hyun. And Gumiho is, of course, the player who would go for weird mech styles very frequently. And Gumiho was known as a very talented Terran player that had success all the way up into Legacy of the Void, but was also an old-school Wings of Liberty name. And at one point in this cast, Tesos and Artosis sort of agree that Gumiho is going to be around for a long time. And a few weeks ago, Gumiho announced that he is in fact going to come back, and he'll probably qualify for the next GSL. So Innovation has to win this game to advance, and this is really when Innovation was at the peak of his powers. He was a grinding, methodical macro player who would just stomp all over his opponents and would just grind them down with brutal multitask and insidiously powerful and consistent macro. And what we saw here was almost a perfect robotic player. You had Terran getting a lot of these new tools that they could use effectively, such as the Medevac boost and the Widow Mine with the Drilling Claw upgrade. If you remember, the Widow Mine and the Hellbat at this time, by default, were as powerful as both of those things are now with Blue Flame and Drilling Claws. But you could also get those upgrades and they would still work, so they could just be made insidiously powerful, but they started out being very powerful. Innovation would actually start to go for a style consistently versus Zerg, and it's the style that if you watch the most recent GSL, you're familiar with. It's the 6 Hellion 3cc pure macro build, the I think I'm better than you tried and true ZVT build. You know, there was a time when Hellions sort of became standard around 2011. Back in 2010, as if you've been watching my Gregathon series where I take a look back at every GSL game Idra played, we can see some of the absurd Terran strategies that were occurring back then. After about a year and a half, Terrans realized how absurdly good Hellions were against Zerg, just because they really limited Zerg. Zerg is the race that always wanted to be making drones, and the Hellion kept the Zerg in check. It kept the Zerg from being absurdly greedy and getting out of control with his creep spread and his drones. Now, oftentimes, what we would see in like 2011 when Hellions weren't completely standard was the Hellions would scream in and get a bunch of drone kills. But after the Queen buff of July of 2012, what we saw were Zergs were able to make more Queens and become safe against Hellions, and the Queens were a defensive backbone of the race, and because the Queen was better defensively, the Zerg could build more of them, and you can never really have too many Queens in terms of the utility they provide. This was a huge turning point in the metagame of Terran vs Zerg, because up to that point the matchup had always been Terran favored, and in 2010 it was very Terran favored, and then as Zergs got better, the matchup became less Terran favored as we saw maps like Test Bug roll out and maps like Lost Temple and Kulos Ravine and Steps of War be phased out. The map pool got better, which means more standard and boring, and the maps are basically like more similar to what we see nowadays as Innovation gets a Reaper out here. And Hyun is going gasless, it looks like. Remember, the windup was way slower in this time, so it wasn't as standard as we see now, where the Zerg is going to go hatchery first into Speedling, take 2 off gas, and then get a super quick third almost every single game unless they know they're going to be 2-raxed. Back in this time, there was more variation. Some Zergs would really delay that gas, but it would make them more vulnerable and more reliant on the Queen. And in my opinion, any style that delays Ling speed is bad. I know that sounds like sort of a ridiculous blanket statement, But the Zergling is the bread and butter of the mid and early Zerg defense, and Slowlings are literally the worst unit in the game. They're absolutely fucking abominable. And it just gets to the point where if you delay your Ling speed, even if you're a good player, you're inevitably going to forget to get it because you're so used to getting that Ling speed with your first 100 gas. If you do delay it to get fast layer or do like a roach cheese or something goofy, his innovation moves the SCV around and saves it. Very nice. And notice he's already started another CC, which Hyun has scouted. And the placement of that CC leads me to believe that he's going to fly it down to the south as opposed to the northeast 2 o'clock. This map, a lot of people would really opt for that top left base, the third that we see Hyun going out to take right now. But Terrans would sometimes take the third directly either north or south of the main, the one that Innovation's going to float to this game, it seems like. And what would happen is that third would be like a push central for Terran, and it would just be very close to the Zerg third. If you look at the mini-map between those two bases, it's very, very close. And it would enable Terran to keep parade pushes going and keep the pressure on as the Reaper dies. Stem has started, Hellions are coming, and this is just a standard little wind-up here as Hyun tries to get his creep down to his third, and notice Innovation snipes the tumors, which is a huge pain in the ass. With Ling speed being delayed as long as it is, creep not being down there really is a huge deal, because essentially the Queens can't do anything, and Innovation's going to run in with the Hellions here, and this is another thing. If you don't get Ling speed, stuff like this can just happen, and you're really having Queens. Anytime that tiny little creep grab happens, you're just in a terrible spot as Innovation's lining them up and mowing them down, as Innovation is trying to roast drones here. He's gotten about 6, continuing to run around, and finally the Queens rendezvous up as Innovation is going to try to get into double digits here. And like I said, we saw a lot more of this in the early days. Nowadays, we don't really see the Hellions ever run in like this because Zergs have gotten so good at defending. And that all goes back to that Queen patch of 2012, as you see around 10 workers killed there. And Innovation's third is starting to come online here, and we're going to see him really start to surge in terms of his money income, because Widow Mines come out here, and again, the third is not connected by creep, and Innovation can continue to run up and be annoying using a combo attack of Mines and Hellions. This is just exceptionally beautiful, crisp, tactical play, and Hyun is losing quite a bit of workers, falling behind, as remember, Innovation's just flawlessly macroing at home, getting upgrades, making workers, not getting supply blocked. Holy crap, it almost looked like he was going to stack them all and lose them there. But we can see, even though Hyun made a good amount of Queens, made a spine for his third, did a lot of things right, we're seeing sort of the fallback of not getting Ling speed. It just makes everything way harder. And a mine is going to go off and kill more workers, as the third base is really the linchpin of this matchup, especially in this era, because once the Terran got that 3 base income, back in Heart of the Swarm, the mineral patches had way more minerals on them, so the Terran could do extended parade pushes on 3 base with Mulehammer against Zerg, and there was a time in the game where Terran could keep a tremendous amount of pressure up on Zerg for a long time, whereas now, because of the way the bases mine out, Terran's having to look for more bases rather quickly. So in this time, Terran had a huge power spike whenever they would be hitting their 3 base mineral income, and the Zerg would be trying to make their 4th base in their mutas. Terran had so many aggressive options where the good ones would put an incredible amount of pressure on that 4th base, especially with Bio Mine and Break It. Now what we have to consider is Innovation scans here, and he doesn't see the Spire, as the players were just really understanding how to play Mutiling Baneling versus the Hellbat and the Mine, because back in the Wings of Liberty era they didn't have to deal with either one of those things. And that's a shitload of splash to deal with, and it took Zerg players a very long time to adapt to this. Well, Innovation was the absolute best at grinding people down with the new Heart of the Swarm tools. But back in 2012, when the Queen got buffed, Zergs were able to make a lot of Queens as the static backbone, and they really stopped dying to Hellion run-bys as much. But with the 2 medevacs out, Innovation's going to be able to punch in here and slap a lot of creep backwards. Anytime you intend on pushing an area, you want to do this before you actually commence your push, because you want the creep to not only stop spreading as far as the active tumors go on the north side, but you want it to be completely dissipated by the time you push in. Innovation stemming and running back and just screaming over with the medevacs and doing a hot pickup, as once the Zerg player gets Baneling speed, he'll be able to defend, but until then, he's in a very rough position in terms of being able to be abused by players with good micro. And Innovation goes for a style with so many mines and bio units that he's just going to continuously wear the other guy down with numbers. He's going to drop all over the place as a mine hides there and does an insane amount of splash. And again, the slow banelings are going to be picked off here, as anytime you have a guy who loves to put pressure on like Inno, those slow banelings just have you licking your chops. Innovation starting the turret at his third. He's pretty much deducing mutas coming out because he doesn't see roaches or hydras. And notice he has a cute little brood war bunker behind his third base. This is an excellent little defensive spot for the bunker because it really screws up the Zerg's ability to run in with a bunch of lings. And good Terran players will also mix in wall-ins with stuff like that. And you always want your third base in positions like this where you're rallying all of your units out. You want there to be a few defensive structures there, because if you do lose a big battle, the Zerg is going to counterattack you with Mutiling, and you want to be able to not just get run over at your third, because like I said, 3cc Mule is where a lot of the power in this style comes from. You don't want to be making that third a PF, that's what the fourth is for. So Innovation really powering up here and starting to hit his power spike. Notice how on point his upgrades are, and he's starting to get drilling claws as well. And this is the area of the TVZ where Innovation would be at the peak of his power. Third base income's kicked in, and yeah, the Zerg is into Mutiling Baneling and is finishing 2-2, and his +1 Muta attack, of course. Innovation's already into his lethal 3-3, and at this point, Innovation's dropping that exterior fourth. As the Zerg player runs up, this is going to be a big engagement into the third as Inno snipes the fourth. Zerg really doesn't do damage here, falls back into the Brood War bunker. Bane's coming back, SCV's retreating, and the bunker doing an insane amount as the Marines stem beautifully, clean up the Zerg army, and Innovation loses no workers. And in exchange for that counter, Innovation sets mines down, screams in with the bio, and those mines are going to decimate the Zerg armies. Remember, the mines did so much more splash in this era, and that means that anytime you mix a mine in with your harass, the Zerg is just going to take tremendous damage on their Mutiling. Because when you're forcing a guy to multitask, he's not going to be eye-fucking the area where he's being multi-prong drop harassed and being able to see mines every time, especially mines that are already burrowed and have drilling claws. Remember, mines were invisible even before you got drilling claws in this era. And Innovation is doing the Terran bread and butter move of dropping the exterior fourth base and pushing the other side. Now, if you see that fourth base, this is what I like to call an easily droppable base. In other words, if you attack the fourth, even if you have to pick up and run away, you can fly into the main, and that's just such a threat for Zerg. That's why you see Innovation drop that base and then pressure this one. And he's going to burrow mines here and holy crap, kill about half the army and run away with this bio. But Innovation's macro is so furious. Notice his 3-3 upgrades are ahead. He's continuing to churn out units. And the mines are so incredibly powerful and do so much splash. The Terran player Hyun, who by the way at this time was really good and a bona fide tournament winner, is in this position where anytime he wants to do any sort of counter-attacking mess, he has to do a severe mine splash. And even whenever he has to deal with multi-prong drop harass, he's having to deal with mines in the drops, which was rare at the time. But notice how much Innovation's constantly producing and expanding. He's killing Hyun supply-wise. He's been ahead of him economy-wise the whole game. They've been pretty much even in workers, but Innovation's been mining more effectively. And notice he keeps punching creep out here. You want to keep punching holes in the Zerg creep while you do other stuff. And notice he's mixing a mine in there as well. Hyun's probably going to move a bunch of lings over, and this mine's going to do a bunch of damage. And wow, there it is. The mine in this era just did such a sick amount of splash. And Innovation is constantly running around, dropping, picking up, running away. And remember, this was right when Heart of the Swarm came out. People weren't used to Terran being able to do this because Boost was a Heart of the Swarm exclusive ability. So you got in this position where Zergs would get railroaded and Terrans would be able to pick up and run away, and Zergs were really having a hard time dealing with it. It's huge advantage here for Inno, as the Zerg player doesn't really have the eco to get into the ultras he wants. Certainly doesn't have the money for infestors, and look at that. Innovation does a big fuck you rainbow drop in his main, doing insane, decimating, cutthroat damage, destroying the ultra cavern. 3-3 has not finished yet for Zerg. It's about to, but he did not want to engage with a upgrade disadvantage, and look at this. He is sort of fractured. It's very hard to attack into mines. Innovation ransacks the main. Now he's going to run away, and hopefully he can boost, or he will lose quite a bit of supply here. But look at that. He's at 193 as he does boost away and start to kill those mutas. That's fucking brutal. Hyun is just getting monster moded by Innovation's perfect macro. And whenever you consider how exceptional Innovation's macro was at this time, and how jaw-dropping it was to see a guy going into this new expansion, an A-teamer in Brood War, people were sort of thinking, well, how much better can macro get? These pro gamers have these new tools. People knew what to expect in Wings of Liberty, but in Heart of the Swarm there was still a lot of untapped potential. And here we're seeing Innovation drop in multiple locations at once with dizzying, absolutely mind-numbing high APM, beautiful execution. You might say, oh well, he's losing some of the drops. He doesn't give a fuck. He's making mass CC. He's losing like 30 supply in drops at times, and he's already freaking at 190 plus supply because he's macroing so well and so brutally. Almost like a Zerg, in the way that Zerg will do a big engagement and then make a shitload of Lings or whatever they're remaxing on and put the eggs into the new control group. His Innovation is just a perfect macro monster in this game, dropping behind the mineral line, and that's GG. So we saw Innovation put on a complete masterclass there. It was one of those brutal games against a good macro player where you can't even get out of your freaking base, it feels like. And Hyun was just absolutely monster moded, and Innovation dropped all over the place and didn't even allow Hyun to think. Even from the very jump, the first 4 Hellions, Hyun was running around defending on the back foot. Beautiful play from Inno. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification. Make sure you subscribe. Sometimes YouTube will unsub people for no reason.